Well, good morning, Nick.
Morning, Matt.
So good to see you.
And you too.
Today we are going to talk about the transition to college. It's late July. I think the high school students who are going off to college are starting to prepare to get going. So we thought this was a good time to start talking about that. I think we were also kind of wondering what to talk about, and this was a subject that we care a lot about. And in fact, I was thinking about that this morning. This is really what drew us together initially.
That's right.
Because we were in a meeting many years ago. We knew of each other. I think we kind of knew each other, and then you and I got to talking about that students were perhaps not as prepared for the transition to college as previously. And so we were like, well, what do we do about that? And thus our working relationship began, and Vogue Academy was born. So here we are. So any initial thoughts, anything that when we decided on this topic that came to mind?
Yeah, well, I think some of them just throw out some big ideas to frame. I mean, one of the things is that we've observed is there's so much focus on getting in, and there's relatively little about after you get in. That's one big idea, and helping students understand the differences, the qualitative differences between high school and college. So that points to this idea of kind of raising awareness and orienting students, as well as preparing. So there's a preparation process, but by preparation, what do we mean? I think it's understanding the kind of institution they're entering, particularly if it's a research university, a Princeton, a Berkeley, a Rutgers, University of Indiana, or I guess it's Indiana University, any kind of major flagship institution, big university has state in it, or a university of, which educates most people. Those are research universities. And they're very different from high schools, for instance, or elite liberal arts colleges where we've worked. Just understanding that where you're going into has really a different culture because it's a different institution. And that has ramifications then for your day-to-day expectations, demands. So I think that's kind of where I'm coming from. We can get into that a bit more, but I know, Matt, you were in the classroom at Princeton teaching, precepting. You were in the residential colleges on the student life side, seeing where people live and the experiences they came up with, encountered on the career side. So really seeing a lot of different aspects of students transition into the university. And we've talked about it over the years, but I mean, what are some big themes for you that you want to maybe prefigure or highlight here?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think what you said initially was really important, that there is so much focus on getting in to a good college that you can forget that is a huge hurdle and a huge accomplishment, but there are bigger mountains to climb once you are in college. And that, I think, students are unprepared for and can really hit them hard that first semester. And I think a couple of things I saw, one is, obviously imposter syndrome is huge. You go from perhaps being one of the best, if not the best student in your high school, to perhaps being a bit more in the mean, you are, I don't want to say average, but you're surrounded by intelligent students, and that can be inspiring or a threat to your self-identity. And so you hope it's the former, but often it's the latter. I think another thing is, I think students are unprepared for the number of changes. It's one thing to go to a different, qualitatively harder academic environment, but you don't realize that you're adjusting to a new location. All your social supports are gone from your friends and family, and even stuff like food. You had a way of exercising, and now you got to figure something else out, or if you exercise at all. Just a different environment. It might be just you're from Florida, and now you go up to the Northeast. I mean, you don't think that those are going to be struggles or draining, I think is a better way to say it, but they are. And so you often see students after their first semester just utterly exhausted.
Yeah.
And it's not just the academics, it's all that. Your body is really working hard to adjust and adapt to an environment on so many different levels. And so the more you're aware of all those changes, I think the better prepared you are to tackle them and adapt more quickly than otherwise.
Well, I think that, I've lived abroad, and you travel abroad and you're often really exhausted. This culture shock is really actually quite a useful idea, because you're processing at so many different levels, so many different ways, and it takes a lot of energy, and there's a lot of uncertainty and unclarity. You don't really know what you don't know, and that can be quite tiring and disorienting in a variety of ways. And I would add, a lot of the institutions that I've just mentioned in terms of research university, they're not prepared for students on the learning side. I can speak to that. They're not prepared for the high school students that are arriving on their campus. They're not ready for those students. So it's not just that students aren't prepared, it's that institutions aren't prepared in a variety of ways. And sometimes they're different, and they're not, and that different is legitimate. It's not inadequacy compared to someone's high school, but these are very different kinds of institutions. And for the perspective of learning, for instance, they're not well designed for student learning. There's a lot of features.
Yeah, that's such an important point. And can you speak a little bit more into that and
Sure.
give specifics and how a student might experience that?
Yeah. So this is a feature of why it's hard. So for instance, let's start with, the course, the class itself. So that's where most academic learning happens. Certainly for students coming in, you're not doing research or big projects. You're learning in the class. Okay, what are the main methods of instruction in college? The lecture and assigned reading. If you look at the efficacy of those modes of communication and teaching for the kind of outcomes that universities want, they're very ineffective. But those are choices by the professor. But they're really, really common. We have very little contact time in classes. Students say, yeah, I have to go to class this many hours. Well, that means you have to spend, the implication is you have to spend that many more hours outside of class to learn more, faster, deeper, of your own choices. You have to decide, figure out how you're going to do that. And often people just don't have the knowledge and expertise and the skillfulness to do that. So let me just go back again. So lectures, how many articles and reviews do you need to find? Do you see? Just look them up. The ineffectiveness of lectures as learning situations. Now, on the one hand, usually from my world, they're saying lectures are bad. And I would actually have a different articulation of the issue and analysis of it. I'd say lectures are ineffective because the assumptions and demands they place on students are not met very often. So let's break that down, right? This is what I do for a living. So you have to be really motivated to be engaged and maintain your focus and your attention. And during this modality where you're sitting passively and someone's standing up there, typically totally didactic, they're just talking and showing slides at you. There's very little interaction. They're not pausing. They're not checking your understanding, maybe like in high school. These are really not learning situations. These are information delivery. Another thing is the professor assumes you have a lot of prior knowledge specific to the course, and even that the prerequisites that this course is based upon, and that you're actively bringing that knowledge to bear to interpret the slide in front of you, or know what this term of art that she's using and the connection, and then you follow their purpose here today. That requires a lot of preparation, active engagement. And so so it's attention, the cognitive, the knowledge, the motivation that is necessary to have that intention, the preparation just for that day, for that session. And then the skills and strategies. Let's just take note taking. I have found that that's the thing that students will spend the least time increasing their skills on. But it's almost always the most important part of a course, is what your professor teaches. So you have this mismatch in understanding of the significance of what's going on, and a lack of interest, a lack of inclination to build the skill that's going to make lectures more accessible to them. So let me just give you an example, and then I'll turn it back to you. So students come to me and say, Nick, I'm going to my X lecture, physics, math, whatever, and I'm really not getting anything out of it. Should I even go, or should I spend that time doing something else? So they turn it into a time management problem, right? Oh, this is a time management. I should spend my hour here or there. And I said, that's the wrong question. Question is, do you think your professor thinks this 15 minutes is important? Yeah, they'll usually come around to that begrudgingly. Okay, they think it's important. So isn't the question then how to make it important to you? How to get out of it what's important to them? If you want to succeed, how do I get what's out of it, what they want me to get? That's the question. And then you can ask things like, well, so what do you think they expect you to do beforehand? Well, yeah, they signed the chapter and do you read it? No. Have you looked at last week's topic that this one builds on? No. I didn't do any of those things either. I'm not judging them. I'm just saying that these are a bunch of assumptions built into the lecture format that students aren't aware of, faculty take for granted, and that are very different than high school, where my teachers assumed we didn't do the reading and would teach accordingly and catch us up. And that's just not how professors typically, at least in the places that I've been, work. They're like, catch up or fall behind, but it's on you, for the most part. So I think that just, if I really break down into the details of what's operating in this scenario, is it lectures are bad? Well, they don't work because the assumptions aren't met. Are the assumptions reasonable, expectations? I don't know. That's for somebody else to decide. I would simply say that's what professors expect. And if you don't do that, you're going to be going against the grain as a student. You're going to be struggling. You're going to be confused a lot. You can't catch up at the end because the lectures build. There's all kinds of consequences to this. And then the reading doesn't make much sense because you don't have that. And it's just a cycle of unfortunately downward. And I don't think most people appreciate that.
Yeah, so let me explore that, because I was going to go off into the point about academic expectations, like going from a adolescence to a adult, which we talk about, but we can come back to that. But I'm curious, so let's say I'm a first-year student, I sit in my lecture, I don't know this, and my professor starts talking, I'm blown away, because I'm like, wow, I have no idea what he's talking about. And they come right to your office. Well, what would you do? Like, how would you coach them?
To my office?
Yeah, let's say, just to give a even more concrete example, you know what I mean, like scenario here that people can latch onto.
Well, I mean, I kind of did with the time management thing.
Right. Yeah.
But in terms of preparing for this component of the class, I would try to educate. There's a part that's educating them about how university courses work, what the guiding, expectations are of the professor who designs the class. So one part of that is unpacking the design of the class. So one way I'll say it is you can't be successful in the institution unless you understand the institution. Like you have to know what's going on in the context, in the situation. If you don't, it's going to be really hard to be successful. So what a professor's trying to do. So I might, I might say, usually I start with something like, what's the goal of the class? And the core objectives, students often don't know. Well, you don't know what your professor's trying to achieve, but you need to get in alignment. Like if you don't know what they're trying to achieve, then how do you know what to focus in on, what to prioritize, how to prepare? So that's one, and it sounds abstract, but it's actually a very concrete question. And I think if you had asked me, okay, what's your professor's goals for the students in this class? When I was a student, I'd be like, what? I'm just trying to learn what they're throwing at me, man.
Right.
Or intuitively, I picked up like the themes. Does that make sense? But I didn't even have the idea that there's a goal, and that the goal would drive their choices about what they teach and how they teach, and then what they would ask me on exams. It was much more like, they're the opposition. I'm going to outsmart them, figure out what they're trying to do, and then, which led me to go to grad school. I mean, there's a way that kind of works, actually, but is not very, it doesn't necessarily lead to learning, maybe more grades than learning. But so that's one thing I might say. Well, what have you noticed about how the lecture works? What are there some patterns? What does the professor expect? I would ask questions. Have you had academic lectures before in high school? Did you ever do this? What was instruction like there in your high school? What did it do? What was effective about it? And what you'll find is a lot of times is they haven't really had these lectures, and that the learning happened through very different modes. And therefore, not surprisingly, they don't know how to do that. So I'm raising awareness. Oh, this is a different thing. Requires different standards, different strategies and techniques and tools. Let's talk about some of those.
And do you find that's comforting to students? Because I can see where imposter syndrome could creep in right away, because you're blown away, you're overwhelmed, and then gosh, how did the admissions made a mistake? I don't belong here. All those kind of thoughts come in, versus saying, hey, yeah, you should almost expect to be overwhelmed because
That's right.
you were taught differently, and now this is an entirely different
Culture.
way of culture, and so yeah, it's a shock. Just to get back to our initial point, and so that's okay. And so, but then to say, well, you do have the ability to adapt, but it is a process of adaptation. So it's going to take some time. It's not like you're instantly going to be rocking, or it may be, but it's going to take a little time to kind of figure things out, which I think is tough in itself because students are so used to performing and always succeeding and doing well and getting the feedback that you're amazing, amazing. And now there's first time it's like, well, maybe you're not as amazing as you thought you were.
Well, I think, yeah, imposter syndrome or being demoralized, some of the motivational aspects. Imposter syndrome goes closely to what we're about, right? Which is, how is your sense of yourself animating your responses, your choices? So a crucial part of explaining these difficulties and saying, for instance, this institution isn't designed for you, isn't ready for you, is not to be mad about it, is actually to change the attribution of the difficulty. So if your professor expects you to really have done the reading and identify some questions and done an analysis and come to the seminar and sit down and being able to offer your analysis, but you didn't know that that was expected of you, and that's going to take more time than you ever put into in high school, that's a very different explanation than I'm not smart. My explanation is within your control. It's so
yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I was going to say, and it's almost and this is where to build off our emphasis on curiosity, because if you kind of take a detective approach to a class, like you said, what's the goal, and then, well, what are the patterns? You're kind of doing detective work. That to me has the possibility of creating more interest in the course, and be like, oh, like, even like to hopefully you have an interest in chemistry or physics or computer science, whatever, but but it can foster more engagement if you're take that kind of detective approach, right? Would you say?
Particularly if you so there's yes, and there's some subtlety here. So there are actually some research that makes a distinction here. So forgive me for the departure, but it's actually very influential to me. It's called Approaches to Study, and this is people out of the UK and Australia, New Zealand, and actually Sweden. But in any case, the point is that there is a way that being like a detective helps you be more strategic. And then you're saying, what do I need to do to maximize my performance? And that has a lot of initiative and agency, and you're asking certain questions. And you're kind of curious, you might say, or inquisitive about how this situation works to maximize performance. That's a common thing. And that was my orientation as an undergraduate student. it's a little different than, or maybe in some ways different than, I'm going to be curious about how this curriculum is organized and the goals to maximize my engagement in learning. The first one is much more superficial. It's on the surface. Does
I
that make
agree.
sense?
No, that's a great distinction or clarification. I like that. Thank you. Because yeah, we want to foster the engagement in a way of learning, not performance per se.
So the first one is called strategic approach. The second one is called the deep approach.
Deep approach?
Deep. And that fosters deep processing versus strategic processing at the cognitive level. And there's notice that there's these patterns. It's like a motivation, intention, engagement cluster. So it's not just the strategies and methods, and it's the motivation, the intentions, the approach is grounded. It's not, you can't purely make this shift by thinking about the methods and techniques. There is an element of motivation, intention. Why are you doing this? Shapes how you engage. I think we take that work and go much deeper and say, yeah, why are you engaging? Why are you here? What is going on for you? Including your sense of yourself that shapes how you approach your academics.
Do you find students or do you encourage? It seems like AI can be a real great tool for this detective work for deep engagement. So just to give an example, as you know, I'm taking this intensive AI coding class for business applications, and it's really interesting because we're really starting from the ground and working our way up. So we're not even doing AI applications yet. We're doing machine learning, data analysis, regression analysis, decision trees, k-means, clusterings, all these kind of things. It probably doesn't mean anything to anyone, but so you have all these terms for how to evaluate, and which tool for evaluation do you use? And so what's great is that the lectures have been okay, but they're not great, but I use ChatGPT, like, hey, I have these two ways of evaluating. How might I use them? Help teach me how to explain it. So I'm using ChatGPT to help me understand more. And once I get it, I'm like, oh, that's cool, because now I'm that much better at the projects we have. There's a mastery. And that to me is really exciting, because I find this really, doing these kind of analyses really fascinating, getting a data set and being able to come up with recommendations. But so it's not like ChatGPT is doing the work for me. It's just helping me ask the right questions and getting answers so I understand the lectures better and where they're going and whatnot. Yeah. So I don't know if have you had discussions with students at that level, or?
Yeah, I think, well, one thing I hear there is you're using pointed inquiries. You're asking pretty specific questions of AI that are framed by your understanding of the course and what it's trying to do and what you're trying to learn. And then you can use that in a sophisticated way. You can use that to elaborate. Like, well, they gave me one example, but not enough, and I don't have enough to really understand what they're saying, or they didn't really explain that concept, but I know it's integral or fundamental to building my knowledge, or what's the application of this evaluation system. So there's all kinds of ways that if you kind of have that awareness of these questions, right, that are you're interacting with the content, you're making some sort of evaluation. What are the strengths of the instruction? Do I have the knowledge that I need to be able to do these things? So these are kind of below the surface of, I think, of what you said, that then lead to these queries. And then you even have some awareness like, well, if I'm gonna be able to do that, I need to know this. So let me go look at what that is. And then now I've got that. Okay, now I want to evaluate the evaluation tool. Okay, those are very sophisticated metacognitive approach uses. And so I think what little I know about the use of AI is that it's very effective for experts who have all these different kinds of knowledge and awareness, and they're discerning. It seems to be less so for beginners in a field. And ultimately, you're right there. All of your questions were about empowering and equipping and educating yourself for something in the future. Well, I think we know that a lot of uses of AI by students are to get something done so they don't have to do it.
Right.
Very different intention. I'm not judging them, but they're short-sighted. It's a very different aim of what you're talking about. And so that level, that's a question. Hey, is this use of AI helping or harming me long term? Right? That's the baseline question.
No, it's a great question because, you know, I I think, yeah, if you just like even if a beginner, if you just have the confidence in yourself to know I can get there. And I think that's where students are struggling, like that you can't, it's so easy to get to a point where you just don't trust yourself. And so then, and I'm not saying this is always the case, but then I think it's easier to kind of say, well, I can't really hack this, I can't do this well, so I'll just use the AI improperly and just get things through, get my degree and go off. Versus saying, just having a genuine interest and wanting a mastery. Because as you said, just to get things done is very short-sighted, and it's going to adversely affect you down the road because you're not gaining this. You don't have this deep knowledge. You're not gaining a mastery that's really going to be appreciated and rewarded in whatever your field is.
That's right.
Versus, for me, I know like I'm just I mean, one is I just okay, I'm older. I've after a while you're like, well, I've faced challenging situations and made it through, so perhaps I'm less inclined to get imposter syndrome, or to doubt myself. But I'm also like, okay, these I want to master because of my desire to be a consultant and go in and really help organizations, nonprofits, for profits, whatever, and just but I need a mastery so that I know how to use these tools and apply them appropriately. So yeah, very well, a good point.
Yeah, you have if I may, to use some of our terminology, you have a purpose. And that purpose is connected to some specific kind of meaning that you want to affect in the world and in yourself. And not surprisingly, 18-year-olds often don't have that, at least not so clearly. But if you notice, the ones who do often are, if let's say pre-med, the pre-med students who are thinking, I had this conversation with a student just over the weekend, who are thinking, often from a personal experience, I want to intervene in how young people overcome cancer. And this thing in front of me isn't just a step to med school. This thing I'm learning will help me help someone. That is such a different motivation than how do I get this point, or how do I not lose this point so that I can get this grade to get into med school. And then and this first one can work, and the first one can be not work, and the second one can work and not work. But the experience of it, the depth of learning, the mental processes you engage in. And so it's not that like 18-year-olds it's not possible for them to do this, right? There are people who love physics and they're engaging in this way and they're 18, 19. It's not purely developmental. It's more about knowing oneself. What do I value? How can I do that in the world? These are meaning and purpose. And that isn't the only thing operating, as you said. You can also have learned, I can deal with things that I initially didn't know how to do. And so that's a kind of sense of self. But one of the ways that we handle that is we have a powerful drive, a purpose that helps me deal with the real feelings of inadequacy or uncertainty or fear. Those are real. Being stuck. If you're stuck, what do you need to get unstuck? You need some force to get you unstuck. What's that force? It could be fear, it could be grades, it could be status. Those are human things. But meaning, purpose, curiosity, desire for mastery, those are both powerful and conducive to one's flourishing, and often pro-social, meaning they often have benefits for other people too. But they're based on a sense of your knowledge of yourself, awareness of yourself, some sense of your values, some sense of how you would act on those values in the world.
So what if I'm sure you've had this discussion for students who don't have that sense of purpose. Is it just a matter of exploring with them what their interests are, or how do you handle those kind of discussions?
Well, I think that was me as an undergrad too. I would just say, I don't
Mhm.
know about you, but um, and I think that's age appropriate. That's another thing. So in our environment, where we're used to, like if you don't know exactly what you want to do, there's something wrong with you. Like no, first of all, you have to just dispel that, right? And the ones who say they know often would be very vocal about what they're going to do and why they're going to do it and what their legacy is going to be, and that can often then people, wait, I thought I was supposed to be exploring here at liberal arts college, and college is to explore, to find out. But then there's I've noticed, and students tell me, there's very few vocal people who say, you're supposed to know, you have to have it out worked out. So I think one, again, it's kind of normalizing, helping students interpret the culture they're in, help them understand educational institution as exploration. Um, to me, that's a start. I think then some kind of work with students around interests, values. So values are enduring, um, but not with the idea necessarily of finding, right? But as exploring and discovering. Um,
How is that a tough conversation? Because I think we all you know we look at kind of youth before school, and there is a lot of exploration because the play and their imaginations and whatnot, and then school can be more you know just about performance. And now we're like, okay, explore, and it's like, well, what do you mean? I've been performing for the last
right.
uh
Yeah.
12 years. So that just is that when you bring up that idea of exploration, does that often get kind of a funny look from students because it just seems so odd to
Well,
the
I,
way
I
that.
think, from our colleagues over in advising, yeah, that, and what the, and our, there are some mixed messages from the institutions. So students, so in principle, the institution is about exploration, and that's part of the rhetoric. If you look at the curriculum and the timing and the prerequisites, there actually isn't very much time for exploration. So let's just be fair to students. They are feeling real pressures, and they often invoke pressures that are not real, are not as solid as they imagine, um, and overestimate the significance of some of these early choices. Now, to their credit, sometimes they undo those as juniors and seniors, right? And they find something. But so I think this is just the idea. So I try to give people at least a little um, concrete step, because ultimately I'm practical. I'm like, okay, so as you're going through these classes, when you find something that really fascinates you, make a note of it. Grab that reading. You're like, wow, that blew my mind. Or this lecture slide, like, whoa. Just bracket it, collect it, put it in a Google Drive, put it in a folder, whatever, so that you can come back to it. So this is the importance of reflection, right? Like you had this experience. What does it mean? What is it telling you? Um, and don't grab the first one. That's, there's a tendency. I understand that. Um, but collect them, at least in your mind, before the days of storage and digital. I took my first college class of psychology. It was my worst grade in college in my major. Why? It just something hooked me. I was like, okay, this is something resonance with something I already did, but also some possibilities. I can't exactly say. Any case, so I think that's a concrete thing. Like you're going to be exploring, see that as exploring, see what you can get from it, right? Take out of it. You don't have to like all of it. Look for the things that you're curious about. Look for the skills that you think would be meaningful and valuable to have. Emphasize those. I think there's sometimes an inclination to judgment. I don't like this class, therefore I'm not motivated. And I'd say, or this thing, and so that implies that what people are doing, not students, people are doing is they're making a kind of summary judgment. And if it's positive, it's on the positive side, then I'm going to engage. And if it's on the negative, I'm not. Well, not engaging in something that's a requirement, and you care about grades, is not a recipe for your happiness. So what I want to change the question. Look for what you want to master. Look for what gets your attention. And if you do that, a lot of times it doesn't have to be most or all. It can be one or two things. And so that's part of exploration. That's part of finding the resonances with you as an individual.
Well, to tread on thin ice a little bit here,
Uh-huh.
you made a comment one time I thought was really, really insightful, that most research institutions that are claim to be liberal arts institutions, they
Mm,
have liberal arts curriculum. They don't have liberal arts education. I think that I'm saying that right,
more or less.
and that's part of the distribution requirements. So it's a curriculum versus an education. Can you is that kind of what you're saying? This
Mhm.
idea of like we kind of we're about exploration, so we have these distribution requirements, but then we're not really equipping you to do that exploration. Is that
Yeah.
correct? Way of
Yeah,
saying that?
I think there's a couple of ways I might approach kind of explaining that. So one is university, you're going to have to go educate yourself. You're going to have to get an education. You're going to have to navigate, make choices, prioritize, reprioritize, make trade-offs, engage, seek out, show initiative, go further in some regard, in some area, and ask a professor and go to office hours, and then correspondingly do less in others because you don't have infinite amount of energy. And so you're going to have to go get an education. These big research universities are not designed for you as an individual to get to educata you, to bring out you in this experience that you and students feel it. At Berkeley, they said, it feels like I'm a number. Exactly. I mean, the scale, that doesn't mean you inevitably will. That doesn't mean you can't make it personalized. That doesn't mean you can't get your goals, but they're not going to be delivered to you. You're going to have to go get educated. So you're going to have to, so that's the case for liberal arts education, right? A liberal arts curriculum. You have to go get it. So that's one piece. And that's part of the transition from we get an education K-12, it's compulsory. We get educated. Somebody's operating on us. We're the recipient. They're the agent. In college, you need to be the agent and you go get educated. And that's a big shift. That responsibility falls. Anyway, so that's one piece. So having a liberal arts education doesn't mean you get a liberal. Then the second piece is you're taught by experts in a very narrow field, right? So if even at a liberal arts college, if you're being taught by a professor with a PhD, they went to a big research university and were fully and thoroughly socialized into that specialization and spent years doing that. So it's actually very hard to teach your specialty in a liberal arts context. How do you teach to a general audience and bring them in and keep them engaged and unpack all these assumptions and your disciplinary commitments and perspectives? And that is a very hard pedagogical task. I will grant that. And the professors are not trained to do that, and they rarely do it. And institutionally, we do not truly support that. And even, Berkeley claimed to have a liberal arts. I worked in the College of Letters and Sciences. That's another way of saying liberal arts education. But we don't have institutional pieces. Let me just give you one example. If you really valued that as an institution, you would say, okay, 20% of every class, the grade has an assignment where the student is connecting this way of thinking they're learning in this course to other ways of thinking that learning in other courses, and explaining how it adds to because that's the purpose of a liberal arts college. How did you learn to think and learn differently by virtue of taking those classes? I've never asked that question. And then put that in dialogue with how you're learning in other classes. If that's the goal of the institution educationally, then that would be built in various ways. But it's not, nowhere. So I'm very skeptical that there's a liberal arts education. There's simply a liberal arts curriculum. And by the way, I do see students doing these things, but it's on their own. It's outside of class time. It's very unsystematic, haphazard, which can be fine, but most of them don't. So that's what I mean. Oh, you're silenced. I can't hear you.
I changed my microphone died again, so you can still hear me now, right?
Yeah.
All right. Sorry about that. No, that's great. Thank you. So got to get to the so what.
Yeah.
And so to kind of frame that, or I don't know if this is a good way of doing it, but here we go. If you were lecturing a bunch of seniors in high school, seniors who had just graduated, here you are, they're sitting there and they're getting ready to go off to college. What are, and you only had a limited amount of time, what would you tell them? I mean, what?
Yeah. Some of the things we talked about, but I'd say college is not grade 13. It's not a small incremental step. It's a qualitatively different thing. And you should think of it as a different culture. And if a transition into that culture, and that you want to figure out how that culture works, be an anthropologist, a detective, how does this new place work? Try to find some joy and curiosity in that, and a fascination. Two, that because it's a different culture, that's going to make there's going to be different assumptions and expectations, and they're not clear to you. They're not going to be made known to you. So you're going to be confused and frustrated sometimes. That's part of a culture shock. Be patient with yourself. Seek out this meta question. How does this place work? How do I get the most out of it? How do I achieve my goals here? And hot take, don't look at the 18 freshman sitting next to you who knows the least about the institution and how to do it. They know the least, but those are the most influential people on first-year students. They actually don't know anything more than you do, probably, and they know the least of anybody there. So that's a hot take, and it's hard to, but students are taking their cues from one another to an extent, fine, but get other input as well. Understand that universities are very different than high schools, and the incentive structure of professors and what happens there. You're not the center of it typically, and that feels very different. It's not about you. It's not about you personally. It's not that they don't care about you, because that's a very demoralizing feeling. Another one is simply that you're expected to be an academic adult by your professors. You're ultimately responsible. You're going to need to take a lot more initiative. You're going to need to work harder, but also smarter, and have in-depth engagement. You're going to need to process your own hesitancies and fears and uncertainties. That responsibility does not institutionally reside in the professor. It resides in you. And that's new and different, and is often not stated. So those are some of the big ideas that I would communicate. But also on the positive side, that many students chafe at high school, and they're really frustrated by, I can only think or write or do this thing. And you're going to have that. You will have that opportunity, but you'll need to go get it, and that's a little risky. You're going to be able to, but also required to make a lot more choices and decisions, and some of them you're not going to be prepared for. Another thing I'd say is, if you're truly wanting to use your college education for career preparation, which has become more and more important to students, then know what career preparation requires. It's not just grades and extracurriculars. So you need to educate yourself. So, for instance, a lot of students think that extracurriculars seem to be more and more important to getting into elite institutions, probably because of grade inflation. So how do you distinguish students? It's all the stuff they do outside of school. But I mean, Matt, you've hired and managed people. I know nothing about anybody's extracurriculars. It doesn't matter. But students often have this idea that this matters to their next stage or grad school. They care less about that in grad school. So they have this false idea of what is important at the next level, including even overestimate grades. So what matters, I think, is ways of thinking, skills, mastery, that you can do things with knowledge, and then a lot of not so tangible outcomes, like being able to figure things out, be a detective, interpret situations, creative problem solve. And so I think it's not to their fault. Those are not the orientations that most students had that got them to places like a Berkeley, right? And so that's a real shift. I'm not blaming them. It's not a moralistic thing like you should do this in education. It's if you want this and you want to get out of this institution, what's going to prepare you and position you for a career, this is the way to do it. And it's different than what you thought. And part of that is actually getting in line with the institution. I guess I don't want to go too far. But I don't know. What advice would you give? I mean, you've done this at least as much as me, or nearly as much.
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, I think we have to appreciate the college is a wonderful opportunity. And I don't think, although you and I have criticisms of institutions, we're not in any way trying to say don't go to college if you have that opportunity, because it is a wonderful time to come to explore, come to understand yourself, and it really can be a wonderful time. It's just how do you really make it this rich experience when, as you said, the expectations can be not what you thought they would be. Like that, oh, I thought I would come to this place that would just love me and support me in all these great ways. And it's kind of like, well, no, you have to kind of do the work yourself. And it's those students who are more self-motivated who really come to appreciate the institution than others. So I just want to put that aside. I think for me, I would start with saying, you don't recall, but the transition to preschool and kindergarten was hard. But you did it. You adapted. Hopefully had a great experience. The transition from elementary school to middle school, from middle school to high school, they're not as dramatic, let's say, but you did it. And they did require adaptation. So I just want to tell students, like, you may struggle and start to doubt yourself, but I just want you to recall how you have over 17, 18 years adapted, and you can do it again. This is going to be harder, but you're in a way more prepared, because you're that much older. I just wanted to say, you can do this, but you have to be aware of the challenges. And if you're more aware, then you're less inclined to be so shocked. You are going to have that culture shock, but you're like, okay, I knew this was coming. And I think you're a little easier on yourself. And you don't judge yourself and start to question your abilities. You're just like, okay, I know this is gonna be tough. I know I'm gonna be tired. I know I'm gonna have those days like I can't do it, but you have those days where you're just kind of tired. You're just like, oh, what am I doing with my life and all that stuff. And you're just like, oh, I just need to go take a nap. I think you're just a little bit.
Had one of those yesterday.
Okay, yeah, it's just like over time, you're just kind of like, oh, I just can't listen to myself now. Let's just take a nap or go to bed earlier. So I think that's important. And I think also I get excited about students who really use their creative problem solving skills. And this is where, when our talks, when we used to give at high school, I would say, you're doing that somewhere now. It might be video games. It might be in, you're a guitar player and you're doing music, or a skateboarder, or I don't know, something. You're spacing challenges in those realms. You don't really think about it because you just love it so much and it's great. But you really dedicate a lot of time to it. I said, that's great. That's really your humanity manifesting itself and blossoming. And just, can you take that and apply it to your college experience? So, and I think those students who use the creative problem solving skills, which really ultimately, I would say, necessitates a sense of, I can do it. There has to be a sense in yourself that I can do this. Because if you don't have that, then you're going to be prey to the fear, the fear of failure, the fear of that manifests itself in imposter syndrome or other ways. So I think that's important as well.
Yeah, if I could pick up a couple themes there, I think so. I think that in the context I've been in university, there is a fundamental question: can I do this? right? And that has the effects that you describe. I also know that for a sense of fulfillment and satisfaction, we need to do things we don't know that we can do for sure. And so I wonder if creative problem solving, I tend to think of that as like the problem in front of me, but it is part of the creative problem solving, creating the problem of creating conditions where I can be successful, creating conditions where I can feel efficacious. So that we would call that in psychology, self-efficacy. I can do it. I've tend to thought about it as the task at hand, but is creative problem solving applicable to creating, and maybe this is our next conversation, creating circumstances, creating a liberal arts education, creating circumstances where I have study groups or what have you. It's not the task at hand, but is the creative problem solving of creating these conditions, these structures and systems for myself.
Yeah, I don't know. I think, I mean, just in the rubrics I've looked at and the ones I believe in, there is a sense initially, and this is Michael Polanyi, that you have to, you have a conflict, you have a challenge, and it has to be meaningful enough to you that you're willing to invest yourself. So in the challenge, which means there's this time where you're living with the awkwardness or the tension of not having a resolution. So there's versus, the fight, flight, or freeze response is or not really freeze, but like fight, flight is a way to eliminate the problem as soon as possible because you don't want to deal with it, versus embracing it. And I think the investment of yourself and the energy that you have to dedicate to it is only if you can kind of deep down say, I know I can find the answer. I kind of know what the answer is. I don't have it right before me. I know I'll figure it out. So that's where the self-confidence is, or the self-esteem. So in a way, the study groups and all that stuff are ways in which you are figuring it out, not necessarily the conditions initially. Does that make, to me, I could be wrong. I have to more. That's an interesting question, but I think
I don't have an opinion. It really was a genuine question. I had never put that angle on it before.
No. That's why I like the question. But I think there's this initial response that says, okay, this is hard, but I want to figure it out. And I deep down, I believe in my ability to figure it out. So, and there's times when like if I stepped into a quantum physics class or whatever, I'd be like, too much, there's no way. I just immediately, it's not worth my time. Versus like this class on AI applications, some of the stuff is pretty complex, and the math, they're exploring the math, and I'm like, oof. But I'm like, part of me is like, well, I can do it. It's hard, but part of it is I want to learn it. So that's important. But then I can learn it is another thing that follows that. And so, and I'm like, well, a lot of the math is something I did 30 plus years ago, in high school and college. I haven't taken calculus and stats or anything like that for years and years. And I'm like, ugh, like I see some of the equations like, oh yeah, I think I used to remember what that symbol was. But but I don't know. Yeah. So I think there's the want to learn and the belief that I can learn it. And that's an initial kind of gut reaction.
Yeah.
So,
well, yeah, and I would notice. I mean, I just notice, and then the awareness of what's going on inside of you.
Yeah, for sure. So anyway, topics to explore.
Yeah.
Next time or in future episodes. So anyway, as always, this is really great, and I think we're going to do a couple talks on preparing for college, just given that it is that time of year. So thank you, Nic, for another illuminating discussion.
Thank you, Matt. It was fun.
All right, take care.